Oh, there it goes. We are
Yes.
live. It's always funny to say we are alive, we live, but we were living before this, and Allah, inshallah, will live on and on and on and on and on forevermore.
Allah, hopefully, yes.
Yes. And we'll live happily and healthily and with all our loved ones and with all the world, and somehow we'll endure. So it is a great pleasure today to be joined by Imane Alaoui Ismaili. And we've had a couple of conversations in the past, which to me were so fascinating that I had to invite her to join us on Facebook Live so that she could share her her studies and experiences, especially as they relate to her analysis of travelogues of British. Are they called sojourners, Imane, or British traveler? I mean, travelogues, obviously they're travelers, but how would the British visitors of Morocco in the early 1900s, how would they describe their own status in Morocco? Were they residents? Did they carry residence, or how did they see themselves within the country? And I guess I'm jumping right in with a question, but Imane, if we'll start with that.
Oh,
I'm talking too much already, but I just want to say this: our conversation today is going to um, draw out all of the incredible information and understanding that Imane has gained by analyzing the text of British travelers from over 100 years ago throughout the Kingdom of Morocco. And what does that reveal to us about today? And what does that reveal to us about Imane Alaoui? I mean,
yes.
more importantly,
Yes,
but
it's that.
let's ask that question. How did the British writers who wrote these travelogues, how did they view themselves within Morocco? Were they sojourners? Were they landowners? What status did they have in the country?
Thank you for this question, Dr. Ben-Meir, because it's highly interesting. Since the most impressive thing that I come across while reading the travel literature is that those British travelers, they did not regard themselves as travelers. That's the first thing, because they came to Morocco through different positions, like diplomats, for instance, like ambassadors of their own country, or just to be within the Moorish courts and to interact with the Sultan of the country in order to find out more about the politics of the country and the culture of the people. Since Morocco was not that known in that period, it was like a cloistered sphere, which not a lot of Westerners could get into and interact with at a close level. So they did not regard themselves as travelers in the real sense of the word, but their accounts, since they traveled to Morocco, they journeyed in Morocco, and they had a lot of travels to other cities within Morocco as well. Their accounts were eventually analyzed as travel accounts. That's with, of course, the definition of travel literature, which developed throughout the years in relation to post-colonialism and to other disciplines as well. Now they are defined as travel accounts.
I see. So it's a genre. The travelogue, or that whole kind of writing, is a genre of literature. And
Yes, the
so,
one. Yes.
right. And and I'm wondering, of course. So, Imane, you're from Fez. Were you born in Fez?
No, I was born in Casablanca. I spent 4 years there as a child, and then we moved to Fez. And I spent most of my life living in Fez. And then in 2013, I moved to Rabat. And in 2018, I moved to Tangier. So I've been moving like a traveler also in my own country.
you,
Yes.
you know, in my experiences in Morocco, it's not always so often we meet someone that, lived in different parts of the country for
Yes.
big parts of their life. So I guess I'm wondering if someone were to say to Imane Alaoui of 12 years old, 15 years old, that you're going to spend your dissertation for a doctorate studying the travelogues of British writers who have, wrote about their experiences in Morocco. If you were going to concentrate on that kind of literature, would the Imane of 15 years old or 12 years old been surprised?
Yes, highly surprised. Even the
Why?
in the bachelor's program, she would be highly surprised, because I have never thought of conducting a study, an academic one, in such a subject, because there were many interesting subjects at that time in my bachelor's program. We were introduced to a lot of disciplines, because cultural studies is a multidisciplinary area, and there were a lot of topics which were very interesting at that time, like gender studies, let's say, linguistics, many other disciplines which were highly interesting. But going back to the history and digging into the archives was not really something that I thought about before. It was just in my MA program when I was introduced first to this area of study. And it was because one of the professors, which is now my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, and whom I really appreciate, and I'm really thankful to him, he proposed the subject, and it caught my interest. And we used to write some essays about postcolonialism, about Orientalism, which are also significant axes of my research. And while writing those essays and trying to analyze the whole topic, I found myself in there, in writing, in the reading and also the writing processes, because it's.
What did you find exactly? What is it that you read, or what theme came across in the literature that touched you most deeply?
Orientalism. That's the first theme which I come across. The Orientalism theme by Edward Said. We read a lot about it, because this theme does not apply for me either before or now. It's how the West and the East are separated, and they are doomed to eternal separation. There is no way for the two blocks to interact with each other. It's like the East is blocking all cross-cultural interactions, and Orientalism is a way in which the West imagines the East through paintings, through books. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for me,
does Orientalism
Mm-hmm.
If you had to define and I think you did in a sentence that you said, but if you had to define Orientalism, what would concisely explain it?
It's a Western style. Orientalism is a Western style by which the West imagines the East through different forms, such as paintings, for instance, such as books written about the East. Since a long time ago, there wasn't such an interaction between the East and the West. So the West imagined the East through such forms, through paintings, for instance, painted by other people who did not even visit the East. So it was imagined like, if also through tales, like one in 1000 Nights, if you're familiar with it. Alf Layla wa Layla. So it's a famous tale about the Orient.
Yeah.
They just saw the Orient,
yeah.
Not the real Orient, just as it is imagined. And also Orientalism can be described as a style, Western style, by which the West can control the East.
I think the last thing you said answers my next question, but within Orientalism, does it say that the West and East are irreconcilable? Does Orientalism allow for the unity and integration and solidarity of the East and West, or does it say that they will remain divided civilizations?
It says that they remain separated as two separate spheres. There is no way for them to interact with each other, and they are highly different. For instance, the Orient is described as uncivilized, as primitive, ignorant, and a lot of other negative attributes, while the West is pictured as more civilized, as the center of all civilization. And this all of these ideas justifies the imperialist project. So one idea leads to another idea.
Well, you know how blocks aren't monolithic, that there are wings and they are part of a same, within the same umbrella or within the same framework, but there are different points of view. Is there a wing within Orientalism that says that the West and the East may have some areas of reconciliation, that that there remains some possibility of level of unity, or would you say that it's strongly monolithic, that they will remain eternally divided?
Well, for me, I chose the theme of Orientalism just as a point of departure for my analysis. Because, of course, if we go back to the post-colonialism, for example, there are a lot of accounts, historical accounts, which resonates with post-colonialism, which say the opposite, that yes, there is definitely a cross-cultural connection in a cross-cultural context between the East and the West. So using and revolving around the idea of Orientalism is just a point of departure to do the review of the literature and say what is there and what has been there and what we have now. Because for every discourse, there is an alternative discourse. It's not the one monolithic discourse which applies at all times. Yeah. We have other discourses which have destabilized Orientalism, and a lot of other critiques and theorists theorized about Orientalism deeply, and then they found out that we can apply other strategies, other theories, which can undermine the logic of Orientalism.
Yeah. So let's bring it down then to the travelogues. I mean, the travelogues are an epitome or total embodiment of Orientalism, as you're saying, because these are Western perspectives of Eastern life. They are Western writers of Moroccan culture and language and so forth. And so is that a fair description of the travelogues that you're studying? They are the embodiment of Orientalism because of who the writer is and what they're writing about?
For me, they're not entirely 100% the embodiment and the example of the Orientalist logic, because they are actually combining both discourses, the discourse of Orientalism and also the discourse which challenges Orientalism. And this is one of the points which I focus on, because I would like to shed light on all the contradictions the Travelogues contain, because at once you can find the traveler adopting this style of Orientalism and providing some quotes or some descriptions which are very negative when it comes to the people or the culture, which really are full of stereotypes and which embody this style of Orientalism. And in other times, in the same passage, in the same writing, you can find other discourses which challenge his ideas. So it's like the traveler is confused. There is an air of ambivalence, of confusion, because we have Orientalism, sometimes which is very strong in some descriptions and some perspectives of the writer, and we can find other discourses which are inherently destabilizing of Orientalism because they present the Orient in a positive light, in positive terms. So I would not say that they are embodiments of.
Well, but you described it as confused or
ambivalence.
Ambivalence. Sorry, ambivalence. Yeah. And when I'm thinking, sometimes in academia, we would receive a research proposal presenting a methodology, and there wouldn't be a critical analysis of the methodology that the researcher is adopting. So if we're adopting, and so as as an evaluator, it's okay, you want to take this methodology, okay, but let me see the antithesis, or let me see a critical review of your own approach. And there's an honesty to that, and there's a truth to that. And so so my question, Imane, is you're calling it an ambivalence, but maybe it's actually them being more thoughtful, critical thinkers by, showing some Orientalism in their, in their conduct, but yet being able to step out of that and being, antithetical to that, or being critical of that. Is that actually showing rigor and, a scientific method, or is it ambivalence?
For me, it is ambivalence, because also sometimes the traveler expresses his own ideas of Orientalism and also of colonialism towards the people, towards the whole culture. And I'm not saying in the whole account, but sometimes they describe them in a very negative way. But in the same, you can find in the same passage or in the same chapter itself, you can find another discourse in which they describe probably the same aspect, but in a positive way. So there is a mixture of feeling when it comes to the traveler. That's how cultural ambivalence works, because they are really impacted by the colonialism, by their cultural background as Westerners, because it affects them highly. And also they are kind of infatuated by the exotic nature of the East, by all what is different. Sometimes this difference infatuates them in that they regard it as something unique and as something charming in its own way. But other times they reject this difference and they say that it's not acceptable since it's beyond the Western norm and it cannot be accepted. That's how I can see.
Could it be possible to be a struggle between the heart and the mind, that the heart may gravitate? Go ahead.
Yes. I think this ambivalence covers a lot of other ideas, and this is one of them, which you say it's a contradiction between, like, it's escaping the mind and following the heart, and vice versa. Because sometimes you can feel that the traveler is really fascinated by the other's culture. They are really interested in knowing more about it, but when it comes to their colonial background, they have to adapt to this colonial background as well, and they have to produce, at the end of the day, a narrative which resonates and justifies colonialism. Because if they produce a discourse which they really feel themselves in, that might not go hand in hand with the logic of imperialism, of course.
Yeah. Is it generous to call it travelogues? Because travelogues imply a sort of honest wandering and observation. And, it doesn't, maybe I'm not enough familiar with the genre, but to me, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an agenda, a political agenda or a colonial agenda. It just means someone, maybe not from a particular area, going through that area over time and writing about the experience. And what you're describing is yes, people going through a civilization not their own, but what they write has very specific purpose, and it's not necessarily a noble one.
Well, because they visited Morocco in its pre-colonial and also colonial period, when there was a lot of Western rivalry over Morocco. There were a lot of Western countries which were interested in colonizing, in knowing Morocco more, in discovering this, as they call it, tabula rasa, which was the land, an unknown land, which no one has set foot in, which is a stranger before. So they had this notion of discovering, exploring the other. And most of these travelers were diplomats, or they represented political positions in their own country. So they were sent there to inform the West, to inform their own countries about the Moorish courts, how political affairs are there, how sultans envision their own political environment, and also how the people functioned, everything, literally every single detail. And this served a great deal to make Morocco known with time and to facilitate those colonialist intentions.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to get more specific as to what they observed. Let me start by asking this. When we were talking about the struggle between the, what we call the heart and the mind, or the heart being what they appreciated, was there a common point or source of appreciation? So are there multiple writers that expressed an appreciation about Moroccan life or the Eastern way, and it was did they say something common in terms of what they liked about Morocco?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I did not.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, there's a number, you mentioned that there's this sort of tug of war between, yes, this sort of agenda and within Orientalism itself, perhaps. And what I'm asking is that, did the writers, was there a common thing that they appreciated about Morocco?
A common thing would be, in general, the architecture of the country. They really appreciated the architecture. It was minutely done, and with great care, they appreciated this. But when it comes to their accounts, for me, they're different. They describe, of course, the aspects of the culture are the same, but the way they approach those aspects is quite different. Sometimes you can find a traveler who appreciates, for instance, Moorish appearance when it comes to their way of dressing. Sometimes it's not that appreciated. It depends on each travel account. But you can find things like, also, there is a trope which is recurrent in travel accounts, which is Moorish hospitality, but not in every town in Morocco. It depends on the town, if it is open to Westerners or not, if there is more interaction there. So I can say that it's quite different from one account to another.
Are there multiple writers that expressed appreciation for the hospitality of a specific town, or lack of hospitality of a specific town?
Yes. For instance, I can say about the Rif people. Sometimes some travelers like Lawrence Harris, he was not really that welcomed by Rifians. However, Frances McNabb, she's a travel writer. She's a female travel writer. She was really, it was really inviting for her how they were so, like, they had this hospitable nature, and they did not regard her as a Westerner who should not set foot on their Holy Land, because there was this idea of the Holy Land. Due to their religiosity, the Holy Land should not be tarnished, between quotes, by other people from different faiths.
I see.
But yes.
Do you think gender, so one was a man, one was a woman, do you think gender played a role to the extent they were welcomed?
I don't think it played a role, because also for Frances McNabb, sometimes she was not well received by other Moorish people. However, in other accounts, we can see that the same town, for instance, welcomes other. It depends mostly on the period of time those travelers went to Morocco, because.
Because.
It also depends on their cultural background.
I see.
If a traveler is from France or from Spain or Germany, they wouldn't be welcomed even in the big cities, which are more interactive with the West. Sometimes this is not a general rule, but sometimes.
When you mentioned the Moorish court, well, first of all, and forgive me for asking such a question, and it really goes to show I should have done a lot more. Of course, I'm before I studied sociology for my PhD, I read Ibn Khaldun, and he's sort of noted as the first sociologist, or one of a founder beyond. I mean, the first sociologist, but or among the first, or the first to sort of create a discipline or codified methodology around it. But who are the Moors? Who were the Moors, and who are and how and who are their descendants?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the Moors were the Muslim inhabitants of the Maghreb, the whole Maghreb, and they were indigenous Berbers who inhabited Morocco a long time ago, because we know that Berbers are the first inhabitants of Morocco. Those are the Moors, and that's what we mean by the Moors. But in this travel literature, the Moors, they combine the Berbers and the Arabs and all Moroccans. And I would like also in my writing, in my analysis of the travel literature, I also want to keep and preserve this term of the Moor, because I want to produce another writing which resonates with the traveler's perspective.
So
and also, yeah. So
go ahead, please.
Okay. So the Moors, as I said, were the inhabitants of Morocco, the Berbers, but later this term also combined Arabs. So when the travel writer speaks about a Moor, it's both Arabs and Berbers. Not only
I see.
the whole Maghreb, but also Morocco, of course. Yes.
I see. Does the word in all of your travelogues, does the word Amazigh appear?
Yes, we have the word Amazigh, we have the word Berber, we have many ethnicities which are mentioned in the accounts. Arabs, of course.
I see.
Yes.
I see. And you mentioned the Moorish court. First, how would you describe, or how did they describe the Moorish court? And is there anything about the Moorish court in your reading that you, Imane, appreciated?
For them, the Moorish court, it represented the government of Morocco. It's not like we have now, but it represented the Sultan, the Qaids, all the political figures who were governing and ruling over Morocco. That's the Moorish court. And before, it was not that known to the West. So a lot of other political figures from Western countries had to go there as ambassadors, as diplomats, in order to find out more about it and to analyze it closely, to interact with the Sultan in the first place.
What do you find most recognizable today that you find in their descriptions of the Moorish court then?
For me, if I can do like a comparison between our government today and the Moorish court, I can say that the Sultan, of course, represents, it's the same thing as we have today. It represents His Majesty, but the way the government is formed now is different from the way it was before. And also the way, I mean, before, the Moorish court was very symbolic, religiously speaking and culturally speaking, to the Moors. It was not just as a political sphere, but also it was highly religious, and it had a lot of effect on Moors. And sometimes it ruled before by fear, by this idea of fear. It symbolized fear sometimes when it comes to the subjects. To the point,
to the point.
To the point that if there is resistance from the people, and sometimes, of course, there were resistance from the natives against the Moorish court, such as like some tribes. Those tribes get confiscated, all of their belongings get confiscated, and they are punished in the most severe ways sometimes. So there was this idea of fear which is more than now, of course. Now we can speak about the freedom of speech, the freedom to express yourself, of expression, but of course not like the way we want it to be, but at least better than how it was before in the Moorish court.
Was the form of dress described in the travelogues a kind of dress we find today?
Yes, sure. Like the jalabas, for example, we still have women in jalabas, we still have men in jalabas, and also veiled women were described a lot. Veiled women wearing only black. We still have them nowadays. But before, they were, of course, it was general for all Moors to be dressed like this. And it's very rare. It was non-existent to find a Moor wearing or dressing up in a Western style. But nowadays, it's the opposite. It's very rarely when you find Moroccans dressed in jalabas or in, black veiled dresses for women. It's the opposite.
Are there dress articles that were worn in the travelogues that aren't worn today? Even, I mean, people may be wearing jalabas, but are there dress articles that we don't really find at all today?
I don't think so. I think there are still nowadays, and I like that actually because you can still see some of our cultural authenticity still existent nowadays with all this globalization and all these movements nowadays. So like when it came to the Moorish appearance, jalabas were described, belga, which is the shoes, were described also, the hat which they wear on their head also. And we can still find those dresses nowadays anywhere you go. Also the kaftan was described when it comes to women.
Were there travel writers that spoke more about food than others? Did any of them give attention to cuisine and produce or the diet of American people?
That's what I like about those accounts. They describe every single detail about Moorish culture, every single detail. And we know that cuisine is one of the significant details of which symbolizes the culture and a cultural authenticity. And yes, many of them described food because when they went to Morocco, they had to journey from one city to another, and sometimes they did not find a hostel to stay. So they had to go to be guided to Moorish houses sometimes. And that's when we spoke about hospitality of Moorish people and also about their cuisine, because they tasted the cuisine and they interact with Moorish families. And yes, it depends on their taste. Sometimes it was described as very good, but generally it was very good. Sometimes it was just different and ingredients were different, but that's very understandable.
So the word Moor was, I guess it's a word from within Orientalism, meaning that it came from the West to Morocco, correct? So the Moroccan people of then didn't call themselves Moors, did they?
I think they did, because this was used originally to describe Berbers and other people from other provinces of Mauritania when it was part of Morocco before. So yeah, it was existent then.
Have you met people that find the word maybe insensitive?
Yes, because I wanted to discuss also this idea, because there was this term of Blackmore, which is attached to Blackmore. It's also used to describe other people from other cultures as dark-skinned, as having a dark skin. And before, in Orientalism also, the Orient is generally described as being inhabited by Moors who have this dark skin, which distinguishes the Orient from the West. Like the West white skin, and then Orient, dark skin, Moors, black Moors. So yeah, it has a lot of cultural weights behind it if you analyze it deeply.
So, and it's within the context of white supremacy as well, exactly. I guess.
It's written in the context of white supremacy, and also it serves white supremacy because this color of being dark skin, it was described as something not that human. They were dehumanized in those accounts sometimes.
So maybe it's best, I mean, you know, again, I feel like I should have been more, you know, more of a student of this topic before, but maybe, is it a word we shouldn't use? Is it a word that it's best left unspoken or in the past, or, you know, part of travelogues from over 100 years ago, and let it be there, but not be, you know, uttered today?
Yes, you're right in some sense, but for me, when I'm writing those narratives, I prefer to preserve it when I'm analyzing from the perspective of the writer, because I don't want to change many things. I don't want to intervene in the research. Of course, it's my research, but I want it to be objective and not subjective. So it's better to keep some objectivity in the research. But when it comes to analyzing objectively, I have to mention the word because it's mentioned throughout the account. I cannot escape it or just omit the word or replace it with another word. But I say clearly that this word is not an innocent and objective word, but it has many stereotypical notions. So it's just to be clear in the research, because otherwise they would blame it on me and say that I encourage this whole idea, but no, that's how I analyze it.
Yeah. Do you think it's fair to say, and again, I mean, maybe I'm getting off topic here, but, you know, I'm Iraqi origins, but I guess I'm sure I've received white privilege, having grown up in the United States, born in the US and all of that. Does someone like myself saying that word, does it carry different meaning than someone, you know, a Moroccan person of you know, origins of, you know, here for 1,000 years saying that word? Does it, if I were to say it, is it as, you know, as one from the West, does it bear different meaning and consequence than if you were to say it, Imane, who, you know, born in Casablanca, generations forever being Moroccan?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think there is a difference, which should not be there, but it's there because all of this colonialist ideology and this white supremacy we have been witnessing, and we are still witnessing today. Because let me just give you an example. For instance, I am criticizing my country. It's okay for me. It's normal to criticize my own country. It would be acceptable. But if a Westerner comes from a different country and then starts criticizing, it's not going to be that acceptable. Isn't it the same? So that's how the world works when it comes to this. But I think academically speaking, in the world of academia, if you were to analyze travel literature, and this word was mentioned 1,000 times in the travel account, you have to mention it also. This is an academia, and you have to be. Yes, but in normal real life, it's going to be different. That's what I think. Yeah. So, and okay, have you, in order to complete your thesis, your doctorate, yes.
So how do you, so you read these travelogues, how do you organize the information? You know, there's so much text and there's so much description. And so what is your way of data management? How do you get your mind around all these descriptive pieces from all these different texts? And how do you organize it? And how do you somehow then write about it? What's your
Yes.
procedure?
It's quite challenging. It was quite challenging before, but then I had to organize the whole everything. So I started, first of all, I divided my analytical part into chapters, big chapters, and each chapter deals with a different travel account. So I prefer to focus on one travel account after the other, because otherwise all the descriptions are going to be mixed and I am going to be confused between their perspectives, because it's a broad thing. It's a broad thing that has to be managed well. So I started, for instance, the first chapter with Walter Harris's book, Morocco, that was, and then I start reading the book. And while reading, when I come across something interesting, a theme which is interesting and which resonates with my previous analysis and the review of the literature about Orientalism and post-colonial theory, then I talk about this theme. I read the whole passage or the whole chapter, and then I focus on this theme and I shed light onto it, and I support my analysis with quotes from the book. And then start reading again, and I move to another theme, another aspect of Moorish culture which was described, and which all fall into this under this paradigm of Orientalist post-colonialist approach.
I see. So you're looking for descriptions that touch upon the your point of analysis being colonization or post-colonization, and how it relates within the Orientalism framework. Give us an example of how in that first writer, how he sort of touched upon that theme.
For instance, one of the themes which is very important in my research is the Oriental openness to the West, because this is not one of the areas which Orientalism touches upon. It says that they are doomed to being separate. There is no point for them to meet, no point of interaction. But when I come across Walter Harris being a close, intimate friend of Moulay Abdelaziz, the Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz, then very good point for me to include in my research, which will support my analysis. So I start focusing on this theme, how Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz was treated Walter Harris in a friendly way, and how he was so open to the West, how he Western items and wanted to try many things, like such as the camera, for example. The camera was non-existent before, and then some other Westerners sent some gifts for Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz, and he was really fascinated by those Western items. But when it comes to other people, they just reject such Western presence in Morocco, whether in the form of gifts, whether in the form of colonial presence, which is understandable, but even in gifts, they're not accepted. But Sultan Moulay Abdelaziz was so open to the West, and Walter Harris held a very important position in the Moorish courts. He was also he was there to be he talked about private things to him, not only about political affairs, but also about his own life, his own aspirations in life. So I include, for me, I include.
Is there a subtle detail that shows how the Sultan, you described one where he would say personal things. Are those personal things included in the travelogue? And is there like a subtle detail that shows how a king is a friend of, what is an act or an incident or an event between these two people that shows friendship?
Those private personal things were not mentioned as such, but you can see from the way he wanted him to be around him all the time. Sometimes Walter Harris just wanted to go or to travel to another city, but the Sultan insists every time for him to stay. And it wasn't for Walter Harris. It wasn't his purpose to stay in the Moorish court for a long time. But then he ended up being in Morocco for a long time until he died in Tangier. He was just there temporarily, just to inform Britain about political affairs in Morocco. But then every time the Sultan talks to him about his private life and insisting on him on staying with him, on having meals with him every time, which is not typical when it comes to Moroccans at that time. It's not typical to be so interested in Westerners.
Does his writing describe the actual meal, what they ate?
Yes, and bread is always described when it comes to the meals, because I think of course bread is not something typical in Western cuisine. This is mostly the first thing which is described, bread, and then many exotic, as they describe exotic meals, which sometimes they cannot differentiate if it's chicken or if it's meat, and also a lot of fruits with every color. It was so rich when it came to Eastern cuisine, Moorish cuisine. It was so rich, and
but I mean, we're talking about the table of the Sultan. So it would be bread. It would be different kinds of protein or meats, exotic or fruit of many varieties. Did the writer describe it as delicious?
Yes.
Okay.
It was different.
Right.
Something very exotic, quite exotic to them. And sometimes, as I said, they could not differentiate between chicken or another type of meat, but they just were fascinated at the end. It was delicious for them.
Okay, there's an interesting comment from Amanda, and I'm going to get to that, Amanda. I just want to ask this question. So the Sultan, showed an openness, and which is inconsistent with the Orientalism, which suggests a sort of a permanent division. How does Orientalism describe situations that clearly are inconsistent with the fixed divide? So what would Orientalism describe the Sultan being not divisive, but in fact wanting to bring these different elements together?
When it comes to the logic of Orientalism, if we speak specifically about sultans, for instance, even if Orientalism is general, it would not speak of the sultan as such, but it says that the Orientals are rigid. They prefer to be cloistered in their own space, and they regard the world as divided into two. I mean, into the abode of war and the abode of Islam. So that was the main idea,
right,
of the Orient.
but yeah, I know, but when you see when you see a society not fitting that model, when you see an Eastern society not fitting that model, does Orientalism provide some explanation of why there are exceptions?
Actually, Orientalism as a theory came first with Edward Said, and he was also criticized for his first book because he did not mention that there are or there can be exceptions. Or maybe he mentioned it, but he did not support his arguments by providing archives which say the opposite. And he was harshly criticized, and for this he provided
another book. Is this I guess this is also the Samuel P. Huntington Clash of Civilizations
Yeah.
Would you say that that thesis of the clash of civilizations is rooted in this sort of fixed notion of Orientalism?
The clash of civilizations is inherently political, and I can say that Orientalism is mostly cultural. That's how I can distinguish between the two.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
okay.
resonates also.
Okay, I'm going to read to you what. Okay. Imane, I'm going to read to you a comment from Amanda. I would be interested in knowing a little about the construction of particular identities created, real or imagined, through these acts of travel during the colonial period. I guess that would be interesting to know how the travelers' experiences related to larger colonial projects within Morocco at the time, especially how their interactions with particular local elites might have influenced later decolonization. Is there something you could say to that? Identity construction or identity creation, and what the Travelogues may have referenced in that regard?
For the construction of identity, it's not that mentioned in travel literature, but we can analyze it from, if we analyze it from the perspective.
So I wish I could answer that. Oh, Imane, there you are. Okay.
Yes. Well, this is another topic of identity. And first of all, I would love, what do you mean by which type of identity? Is it the cultural? Is it the ethnic? Is it the religious? I would love to know about which type of identity you refer to. And also, do you refer to identity as the identity experienced by the Moors or by the travelers during that time? In order for me to be able to answer
I think I see. I think there's Amanda may be referring to, because she says here local elites and nationalists. So let's say political identity as observed by the travel writers.
Okay, let me just read something.
And also involving women, family, or technology, or politics.
So basically, if I understood the question correctly, Amanda, you would know more about the construction of political identity during the period of colonialism in Morocco. And is it viewed from the perspective of the traveler or from the natives? Because I see that this question is quite broad, and it also involves women, family, other themes.
It's okay. Take it in any direction you want.
For the construction of identity during that time, political identity, I'm going to take it from the perspective of the Moors, how they perceived their own political Moorish courts during that time. It was an identity constructed basically on fear, as I said. And it was a troubled identity for them because they did not know anything. Because identity is mainly based on identification with something. To construct identity, you have to identify, you have to have ties with something which is strong. But for them, they had loose ties with their with the Moorish courts because they had a general they had awareness of it, but they could not express themselves. They could not identify with it since they did not see themselves in this political environment. So it was basically based on fear. It was a troubled identity. Because, for me, that's how I see it. Because if we speak about an identity which is complete and constructed on strong foundations, then I can see that, yes, I can call it a political identity with the real sense of the word. I hope I answered your question, but please, if you would like to find out more about a specific theme, just ask me specific questions, and I would be happy.
You know, I'm gonna. There are a couple last questions that come to mind. One is, you mentioned that each chapter is going to deal with a different travel writer, I'm sure there's going to be a comparative component or some kind of analysis that draws themes that emerge from multiple chapters. If you were to reflect on the the cross-analytical aspect of your research, what comes to the fore? What's the comparative lesson from all the different travel writers that you've analyzed?
When it comes to the cross-cultural interaction between the East and the West, I closely look at every single interaction between both spheres, whether it's in the Moorish court, whether it's in normal real life, whether it's in the hospitality of the Moors when a Westerner visits them, in every single embodiment of this cross-cultural interaction. And sometimes, if the cross-cultural interaction is happening, I look closely also at other aspects, such as the space in which it's happening, and also the voices which are monopolizing the space, and every other aspect which comes under this cross-cultural interaction, but everything in every form of it.
Yeah. Would you say that travelogues are more similar than different to each other in terms of their observation? Is it striking their similarity? Is it surprising their difference? When you reflect at the different ones, are you more? What surprises you when you look at the descriptions of when you reflect on their total descriptions? What surprises you in terms of their similarities and in terms of their difference?
For me, what can surprise me more is the perspective of the traveler, which shifts from one book to another, because it depends on each traveler's own cultural background and their own stock knowledge, which they have about the Orient before even visiting the Orient. But in terms of the similarity, for me, they are quite similar, since they describe more or less the same aspects of the culture of the Moors, the religion, the politics. Every aspect is described there. The differences can appear in the way they approach such aspects of Moorish society. Just their own perspective of things. That's the differences. But for me, they are more similar than different. And what surprises me every time is this perspective, which transforms every time, changes from one account to another. Every time I come across a new perspective spoken from the traveler's voice.
And finally, if when reflecting upon the travelogues, and you had to then write a policy reform today, that for Morocco, if you look at all this literature from 100+ years ago, and all of the cultural and other forms of knowledge that it reveals, and you had to make a recommendation for a new law or a new program or a new policy that had to be enacted in Morocco today, reflecting upon all of that, what would it be?
It would be changing our own curriculum at schools. Because for me, this other version of history, I never came across it before in historical books of our own schools. So I had to dig into archives, which are mainly forgotten, ignored, or not even, people do not even know that they are there. They don't know this history, which is spoken from a Western perspective, and also when it comes to quotes said by the Oriental's voice, then we can find out another discourse, historical discourse, which is not mentioned in our curriculum. So yeah, it would be a very nice idea to go back to our history as it's described from the Western perspective, And because like me, it changed a lot in me, and I discovered a new discourse. And also for generations to come, I would like them to discover this and to explore it more deeply, since it opens a lot of venues when it comes to cross-cultural encounter between the East and the West.
Yeah. Well, what if someone is, so you were saying, you know, curriculum and education, and what if someone in the Ministry of Education, you were to say that to, and then the person that you says it to would say this, that's interesting, but I would much rather teach travelogues written by Moroccans, travelogues written by the diversity of the Moroccan people, and to hear their voices rather than teaching our young the voices of Westerners and putting upon us their view of us. Well, let's teach our young the Moroccan voices of who we are. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'd respond as the following, because for me, those travel accounts are not 100% entirely Western in their view, because they include a lot of accounts, a lot of quotes, a lot of stories spoken from the native's voice. So for me, they provide a double perspective, spoken from the Western and the Eastern's voices. Both of them are there, both of them exist in these accounts. So it would be interesting to know not only our point of view, but also the other's point of view. It's for me, it's richer. It's going to provide more ideas, a lot of ideas regarding this cross-cultural encounter. The cross-cultural encounter includes two parts, the East and the West. So also in those accounts, we have both perspectives, not only one perspective monopolizing the whole account. For me, it's going to be richer than just focusing on a single monolithic account, either from the Moroccan point of view or the Western. They provide both.
I see. I see. Is there a lot of literature, travelogues written by Moroccans? I'm sure.
Travel literature written by Moroccans? Yes.
Yeah, about Morocco and, you know, going through the nation and describing what they see, similar to the British travel writers of over 100 years ago.
You mean Moroccan travel literature writing about their country, about Morocco, or about other Western countries?
No, Moroccans writing about their country, but in a travel log genre.
There might be, I'm not sure actually about this, but even if there are, it's not that much. I would say there are more Moroccan travelers who went to, for instance, to the United States before, and they wrote accounts about the West. Yes.
I see. I see. I guess travelogues imply intercultural, that it's taking someone from one culture or society, and that someone is traveling through another culture or society. Is it implicit that it's, I see, okay. Let me ask you this. Would you, if you had to write well, you're Moroccan, of course, Imane, but if you had to write a travelogue about Morocco, well, if you had to write a travelogue, where would you do it? And reflecting on the travelogues that you've read, how would you do it?
If I were to write a travelogue about a Western country, about a Western country, was that the question? Or any other country?
Or I guess could you write a travelogue about, would you like to write a travel? I know it wouldn't be intercultural necessarily, although there are many cultures in Morocco. So perhaps it would be, but well, let me ask you, this is really the question I want to ask. If you had to write a travelogue about Morocco, where would you go? And reflecting on the travelogues that you've read, how would you, what point of view would you take, or how would you do it? Where would you travel, and what would your writing sort of embody?
I would choose to travel to Tangier, since Tangier was the first city which Westerners, those traveler writers, when they come to Morocco, that's the first city they set foot in. And it was described in such a light which was different from the other cities. It was one of the international zones in which Westerners used to live comfortably and freely. So I'd love to go there, but not in that period, in this period. I'd love to go there and start doing research and writing about the city of Tangier, and meanwhile reflecting about the history of Tangier as I read it from the books. Is it the same as it were? Are the natives thinking the same when it comes to Westerners? And also maybe do field work and then do questionnaires and interviews with Westerners living there in Tangier. Do they live the same way they used to before? Because before it was like their home. They lived comfortably there with no prejudices, nothing. They were welcomed in parties. I'd love to do like a comparative research, temporal comparative research, combining both the present and the past, and see.
I see. Let me, I know I said like 5 questions ago, this will be my last question, but, and in fact, our previous 2 conversations, you had to sort of stop me from asking because it goes on and on. But I'm curious to know, if you were to go through this life and you wouldn't have written that travelogue in Tangier the way you described it, would you be heartbroken? How important is this to you to write that travelogue that you described?
What do you mean? Would I be heartbroken, first of all? Because I think
what if you never? Okay, I guess what I'm asking is like there are things if I were to go through this life and not experience or try to pursue certain things, at the end of my days I'll be like, dear God, please, why didn't I try? So I'm asking you, if you how would you feel if you would go through that? Is it really, really important to you to write that travelogue about Tangier? And how would you feel? What would it mean to you if you did or if you didn't?
Well, first of all, you asked 2 questions. So the answer for the first question, I have 2 answers for the first question. I wouldn't be that heartbroken because I know that times have changed and a lot of things have changed with the times. So we have to keep up with the time, and even if many things change, it's fine. But I would be heartbroken only if I explore and I find out that the openness towards the West is less than how it was before in that city, and the way other Western minorities live there is not that welcoming as it was before. Yes, I would be heartbroken because normally it should change towards the positive, not to the negative. And yes, it would be important for me to write that because I would explore another stage of my academic journey, not only reading about travelogues, but also writing them. It would be very good, very important.
Right.
So I guess I answered both of your questions.
So thank you, Imane Alaoui Ismaili. What does Ismaili, does that mean? What does your last name mean? What does your entire name mean? Imane Alaoui Ismaili. What's the root or origin, or what is the meaning of your name?
Well, Alaoui Ismaili derives from the Alaoui dynasty, which is the current Moroccan royal family. So it derives from the Alaoui dynasty, and we had many dynasties in the past. This was one of them, and it's still ruling now over Morocco. So
I see. Okay, so I'm wondering, so I'm not seeing, I don't know if Sana, if there are other comments to share, but we've been going for over an hour, and I think I'll let you get on with your day. But I enjoyed it, Imane. Sana, I thank you so much. For anyone who may have, listened, we're grateful. And so again, next week, Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we'll have another special guest, Imane Alaoui Ismaili from the Alaoui dynasty, the Travelogue researcher and analyzer, and maybe one day Travelogue writer. We thank you so much, Imane Alaoui. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much,
Sana. Be well.
for all the interesting questions. Thank you for the audience, and have a nice day. Enjoy your day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Be well. Bye-bye.